Mexico is a land of contradiction. The home of the most violent gangs in the world is also home to some of the most radical leftist organizing. The country that gives free televisions to the poor also considers this show entertainment. The country ranks first in level of impunity out of all Latin American countries. An estimated 92.8% of crimes go unpunished. Middle and upper class citizens are turning to private protection to replace the role of the police, after 2017 was the highest the murder rate's ever been. This leaves regular citizens without protection in a system where the courts, law enforcement, and drug lords all collaborate. The environment is equally suffering, with deforestation and mining mega operations that are gutting the country's resources. Early last year, massive protests erupted over President Enrique Peña Nieto's raising gas price in the country. And while the protests have left the headlines, the price increase, rising cost of living, and appreciation of the peso is crushing the average Mexican worker. The World Bank estimates that almost half of the country is living below the national poverty line. With falling purchasing power, workers on a minimum salary could only afford 33% of the recommended amount of food. Their wages would need to triple to meet the standard of living. State-sponsored disappearances are common in the country, leaving the dissolution of the state as a natural answer for this to many. Autodefensas groups are on the rise, and the Zapatista movement, an armed revolutionary group, controls vast parts of the state of Chiapas. Liberals and progressives are quick to point out that Mexico has seen real transformative change. And while this is a commendable thing, it's clear that the most vulnerable of the Mexican people are not seeing the fruit of that change. How did we get here, and how do we get out? Our story takes us back to the revolution of 1911, in which dictator Porfirio Diaz was ousted by a coalition of the middle class and the peasantry and organized labor. Madero was elected president in the subsequent free elections and made strides towards a liberal democracy, instituting increased freedoms of the press and protection for organized labor. Villa and Zapata both held strong populist convictions and were violent, misogynist homophobes. Machismo has played a large part in the formation of the Mexican identity. Anyway, fast forward past another civil war, and Mexico entered a period of massive growth. A one-party state that was to balance urban, agrarian, and business interests was being developed. During the 1920s, Mexico saw major land reforms, giving land to the landless under the HECHO program, which was used as reparations for indigenous tribes, and experienced a cultural and artistic renaissance that shined a light on the importance of the indigenous struggle. The reforms continued under President Lázaro Cárdenas under the state party Institutional Revolutionary Party. Cárdenas, a true democratic socialist, gave refuge to communist leader Trotsky after he was ousted from the Soviet Union. Between the 30s and 40s, land was expropriated from wealthy elites and converted into cooperatives. The foreign petroleum companies were taken over by the Mexican government. A strong message was sent to foreign powers. Mexico would not be exploited by others. Things started to change in the 1940s. By now, the state party had developed a reputation for corruption and had shifted from a party inspired by labor and socialist movements to a center-right regime. After World War II, PRI instituted an import substitution and heavy industrialization policy that gave Mexico an economic edge. Labor contracts and strikes were strictly controlled. The official role of the unions, often corrupt and violent, was to maintain peace and anchor wages to ensure that Mexico was a profitable investment for foreign and domestic billionaires. The economic growth was internationally dubbed the Mexican Miracle. Reformist movements grew under the authoritarian regime, which the PRI-led government responded to with violence. Political activists who were inspired by revolutionaries like Emiliano Zapata and Che Guevara were assassinated. Real questions arose as to whether Mexico would be the next Cuba. as communist guerrillas and independent unions threatened the state party's power. The Mexican government continued its attacks, and guerrilla forces grew in ferocity, an extended clash known as the Dirty War. As the Cold War began winding down, and socialist parties were legally allowed to exist, it became clear that another revolution was not to occur. Between 1970 to the early 1980s, as the Mexican miracle continued, Mexico's debt had increased from $3.2 billion to $100 billion. Suddenly, the international oil crisis tanked the Mexican economy. Struggling to make payments, Mexico accepted loans in exchange of mandated structural adjustment programs. The days of import substitution policies were over. The economy was to be opened up fully to foreign companies, trade barriers torn down, critical social spending on healthcare and welfare cut, and credit access restricted. Under Madero, official unions collaborated with the government to stifle any workers' rights movements. The passage of NAFTA, the North Atlantic Free Trade Agreement, worsened the situation in Mexico. Under NAFTA, Mexico could no longer distribute land under the HECHO program, or review foreign investments. Expedited travel visas are available for the business class now, but not working people. Borders don't exist under NAFTA, except for the working class. Prior to neoliberalization, the state party PRI essentially regulated drug trafficking and covertly taxed it. There was only one big kingpin around, Felix Gallardo, maintaining peace and control. During the 80s, however, Mexico lost 800,000 jobs. Farmers were hit especially hard under NAFTA, when subsidies were eliminated and land privatized. Workers flooded urban centers, while Mexican billionaires entered the top 400 richest Forbes list. Farmers turned to growing marijuana and poppies to survive on the land. The poor and populated urban centers gave cartels a growing pool of able workers, and the poorly paid military and police was to be the cartel's army. In an ironic twist, the scant regulation of northern sweatshops, commonly referred to as Maquiladoras, that US companies profited of, allowed drug lords to easily smuggle drugs into the United States under limited supervision. After Reagan and Bush cracked down on the Colombian-Miami drug trade, Colombians shifted their routes to Mexico, and when Reagan commanded Mexico to militarize the conflict, the government obeyed and enlisted the army to help combat the domestic drug trade. Felix Gallardo was arrested by authorities, fragmenting the cartels, leading to unprecedented levels of violence. Cocaine was a profitable business, so profitable that the solicitation of a drug lord could not be turned down. Plata o plomo, silver or lead. After the state party was voted out in 2000 in favor of the National Action Party, democracy had been theoretically implemented in the country. In 2000, President Vicente Fox promised change and ramped up the militarization of the conflict. Worsening the situation still, in 2004, the NRA blocked a highly popular ban on the production and trafficking of assault weapons, creating a deluge of newly manufactured AK-47s and AR-15s, all delivered straight to the door of the bloodiest gangs in modern history. Fox's successor, President Calderón, took office in 2006 amidst massive unrest and protests over accusations of fraudulent elections. Calderón promised to escalate the war, no matter the cost of lives. The violence shows no signs of stopping, and mass kidnappings from the 43 desaparecidos in 2014 to the recent series of kidnappings in 2018 proves the legacy of PRI lives on in the banned government. Labor unions have had to radically transform in the age of neoliberalism. It's no surprise that in January 1st of 1994, the day NAFTA went into effect, a group of armed insurgents successfully fought off the Mexican military in Chiapas. The Zapatista movement, inspired by Emiliano Zapata, combines elements of Zapatismo, anarcho-communism, and indigenous culture to create a revolutionary representative democracy. Men and women are equal in their communities, and they've done all they can to return power to the indigenous people. And so the Mexican people trudge onward, creating successively more independent and self-sufficient communities amidst the chaos. What does the future hold for Mexico? Well, a new justice system has been implemented, and wealth has been slowly trickling down. The people remain vigilant and erupt in righteously massive upheavals at any provocation. Voter turnout remains average, and the Zapatistas have given an indication of remobilizing now that they've reached total independence from the state. General consensus remains that as long as you're unaffiliated with the drug trade, you're safe from targeted violence. Whether the current state has any role to play in the creation of a new Mexico is a hot topic. The role, size, and power of the state will undoubtedly continue to increase under the guise of peace and freedom. A Mexico free from violence and imperial exploitation from both the state and the gangster is a dream of two-time election loser candidate Andrés Manuel López Obrador for the upcoming 2018 elections. Whether voters elect right-wing reactionaries or progressives remains to be seen, but the Mexican worker must not wait. Today, the only actor the Mexican people can always rely on is not the state, not the union or the party, but each other. Creating spheres of power outside of the realm of the state remains imperative for anyone who wishes to protect themselves and who holds hope for a better future. And as for democracy, until the neoliberal policies that crush the Mexican worker under its weight and hold the government hostage are done away with, Mexico will remain a democracy in name only. Thanks so much for watching. If you liked the video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Post a comment down below telling me what you thought of it. And hey, if you have a few cents to spare, consider dropping me a dime at my tip jar. Thanks so much.